Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was interesting to hear in that speech from Jonathan Young around the question of the importance of balance, as he described it. And for the Labor Party, this is the issue that we've previously dealt with within the exclusive economic zone legislation that we had before the House, is the question of this government's view that it is important to insert into this legislation some way of giving economic activity greater prominence. And this comes in this particular legislation in what will be what is Clause 31 of this bill, with the new economic test that will be applied for mining. And as my colleague Moana Maki has said, why just mining? Why not other sectors that have to get concessions? Why is mining being lifted out in this way? And what that does is it raises concerns for people that once again the government is trying to tilt the balance. And in fact, the underlying problem here is the fact that they view it as something that needs to be balanced, the economy and the environment. What's not understood by members on the other side of the House is that the two things are two sides of the same coin. They're not actually being balanced. You don't get to have the ability to exploit natural resources in a sustainable way if you don't have a sustainable environment in the first place. If you don't actually protect and preserve the environment so that it sits at the heart of the economy and the heart of the natural economy, particularly in New Zealand. And so I guess from our side of the House, Mr. Speaker, that's why we are concerned, and my colleague Moana Maki's already mentioned this, about that particular element of this bill, the introduction of this economic test. And we certainly on this side of the House would like to see, for our ongoing support for this bill, that addressed. We had this exact debate in the exclusive economic zone area. We got some movement from the government in that, but we didn't get all the movement that our side of the House would have wanted. And so that is one of the two very significant issues that give us cause, Mr. Speaker, to say that yes, we'll support this to select committee, but we certainly have reservations about that. The other matter that we have reservations about, which Moana Maki has also spoken about, is the question of the role of the Minister of Energy in having a decision-making role alongside the Minister of Conservation as to whether there should be public consultation on concessions. We, on this side of the House, have a strong position that that is not the way that this should be done, and that we are asking the government, in the spirit of the good faith that they have come to us to say we want this to have cross-party support, to say that on this side of the House we find that provision difficult. We cannot support the bill through the full stages if that provision is going to remain in the way that it is, because we believe there is a reason why the Minister of Conservation has this role. It's conservation land. The Minister of Conservation has charged by the government with looking after, on behalf of the people of New Zealand, the conservation estate. Yes, the Minister of Energy may well have interest in it, and I think anyone who's been around government processes, anyone who's been around government processes over the last few years will know that in any situation like this, the Minister of Conservation will speak with their colleagues, and it won't just be the Minister of Energy. It will be the Minister of Tourism, or it might be the Minister for the Environment. It's very important that the Minister of Conservation does that. It's part of doing their job properly. But ultimately, the decision should lie with the Minister of Conservation because of the nature of the land that we're talking about. And again, as Moana Maki said earlier, the speech we heard from Phil Heatley today indicated exactly why it's dangerous for the Minister of Energy to have that role, given the kind of advocacy we were seeing from the Minister when he spoke today. So on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we have significant concerns about the idea that that will be changed. The government made such a shambles of their work around mining and Schedule 4 in the last term of government that they actually left themselves in a position where this was what they felt that they had to do. They had to find some kind of way of improving the odds, as it were, for the extractive industries. And they've now come into this House with a bill with two areas where they try to do this. One around the economic test and one around the role of the Minister of Energy alongside the Minister of Conservation. We on this side of the House do not believe those things are useful. We also do not believe that they're necessary in this kind of legislation. If the government is prepared to come at this from the point of view that the environment is what lies at the heart of enabling us to do things in our economy, and we cannot simply see these things as a balancing act especially a balancing act where the government puts in place legislation that will weight that balance in favour of the economy and against the environment. So we do have significant concerns on those grounds. As other speakers have already noted, there are elements of this bill that the Labour Party does support. We certainly like the idea that there will be automatic inclusion of protected lands into Schedule 4. We think that is something that will be very useful. We think that is a process that most New Zealanders would like to see occur, and we think it's the kind of legislation we'd like to see before the House. Also, the idea of pre-vetting applicants so that they're screened for health and safety and environmental capability. This is important. This is important because New Zealanders expect this House to set up the most robust regime possible for where there will be the extractive industries involved. New Zealanders want to know that if we're going to undertake this activity, it happens on New Zealanders' terms. It happens along with the rules that we would expect to protect the environment that New Zealanders feel so much, that's so much integral to who we are as a country and to our brand overseas as well. So we have to set up robust regimes. Putting in place a pre-vetting process will allow us to make sure that if there are players in the extractive industries who don't meet the kind of standards that New Zealanders would expect, then they won't be able to get here. And so on that count, we think that that is a useful provision. The streamlining of processes is also something that obviously we want to look at in the committee to see exactly what that means, but we obviously support the idea that those processes are clear, and also the idea of a two-tier system for mining permits. We need to make sure that in land where there is particular value, we have a highly stringent process. We like the idea of strengthening that. If it is possible to still protect those values with a different process for the second tier, then we can also go along with that. So for those reasons, this is a finely balanced call for the Labour Party, but Mr Heatley has come to us and said he wants to put in place an enduring piece of legislation, something that actually will help develop in New Zealand a shared understanding of how things will work in our natural environment, what role the industry has, what role the government has, how we will ensure environmental protection. We welcome that approach, but we caution the Minister that if there is going to be cross-party support for this kind of legislation, it has to be based on the idea that the environment that we have is protected and that the role of the Minister of Conservation is understood. The conservationist state is there for a reason. New Zealanders have over generations said we want to protect this land around us, to provide us with the kind of natural environment in which we can both have recreation, but we can also support, where appropriate, people entering that environment and using the resources. But we cannot have a situation where the balance is tipped so far in favour of the economic considerations that we leave those environmental ones behind. So on balance, the Labour Party is supporting this bill to the Select Committee, Mr Speaker, but we do so with serious reservations and a clear indication to the government if those issues around the role of the Minister of Energy and also around the economic test, if we cannot actually work together on those and find a solution, the Labour Party will be unable to support the bill in future stages.
I call the honourable member.